Voldemort is dead, but his doomsday weapons remain. The Potters are now a ruthless Black Ops team hunting them down. Will Harry save the world, but lose his humanity? Before we start the mission, please hit subscribe and like. Drop a comment below to sound off for today's roll call. Let's dive into the shadows. The rain in Berlin didn't fall. It drove hard against the pavement like shattered glass. It was a cold, unforgiving night in the Mid District, the kind of night that kept honest people indoors and allowed the shadows to stretch just a little bit further. Harry Potter stood on the rooftop of a neoclassical bank building, the wind pulling at the collar of his dark tactical jacket. Below him lay the Nachtgulb, the Night Vault. It was a clandestine financial institution that catered exclusively to the magical elite who preferred their galleons stained with blood. Before the fall of Voldemort, this place had been a sanctuary for Death Eater wealth. Now it was a tomb holding secrets that were infinitely more dangerous than gold. Harry didn't draw a wand. He hadn't relied on standard spellcasting since the war in America changed him. Wands were expressive, vocal, and bright. Harry needed none of those things. He raised his right hand, his fingers clad in dragon skin leather. A faint, barely perceptible hum vibrated the air around his fist. Kinetic magic. It was raw, unchanneled physical force, harnessed through brutal discipline and the runic scars etched into his forearms. He stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall so much as he manipulated gravity to pull him down at a controlled, terrifying speed. 10 stories dropped in 3 seconds. Just inches before he hit the cobblestone of the alleyway, a kinetic shockwave flared from his boots, absorbing the momentum perfectly. He landed without a single sound, save for the splashing of a puddle. The bank's rear entrance was guarded by 2 heavily armored trolls and a lattice of shimmering, violet detection wards. Harry observed them from the shadows, his face a mask of absolute, chilling calm. The boy who lived was gone. In his place was a surgical instrument of war. He moved. Before the first troll could even grunt in alarm, Harry was inside its guard. He drove his palm upward into the creature's jaw. The kinetic impact was devastating, a localized implosion of force that shattered the beast's skull without a single spark of light or a drop of blood spilling onto the pavement. As the massive body began to slump, Harry pivoted, grabbing the second troll by its thick leather bandolier. He channeled a concussive pulse through his grip, sending the second guard crashing silently into a magically dampened wall. Both were unconscious before they hit the ground. The wards were next. Standard cursebreakers would spend hours unweaving the arithmantic threads. Harry simply placed both hands against the violet barrier and pushed. The kinetic pressure forced the magical frequencies to bend, warp, and finally snap like over-tightened piano wires. The doorway hissed open. Inside, the vault was a labyrinth of polished black marble and silent alarms. Harry moved like a ghost through the corridors, bypassing tripwires and neutralizing 3 more human guards with swift, brutal strikes to their pressure points. His target was Vault 713, a poetic irony he didn't care to dwell on. The vault door was a massive slab of goblin-forged steel. Harry pulled a small, densely inscribed runic core from his tactical vest. He pressed it against the locking mechanism. The kinetic battery detonated silently, forcing the internal gears to grind themselves into fine metallic dust. With a heavy groan, the door swung open. Inside, resting on a velvet pedestal, was a simple, black leather ledger. The manifest. The complete, unredacted list of Voldemort's dark armories scattered across the globe. The weapons the Dark Lord had been saving for his ultimate conquest. Harry slipped the ledger into his jacket, his emerald eyes scanning the room one last time to ensure no traps were triggered. The power vacuum had begun. The world thought the war was over, but Harry knew the truth. It had only just gone underground. He turned and vanished into the Berlin night, the first ghost of the Obsidian Protocol. The safe house was a decommissioned Soviet cargo plane sitting in the forgotten corner of an abandoned airfield in Eastern Europe. The interior had been gutted and magically expanded, turning the fuselage into a mobile command center, armory, and living quarters. It smelled of ozone, gun oil, and stale coffee. Lily Potter sat at a metal table, her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. She coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous space. As she coughed, a faint, terrifying glow pulsed beneath the skin of her neck, the ignis anima, the soul fire curse. It was the price she had paid to survive, to protect her family. It kept her alive, but it fed on her very essence, slowly burning her from the inside out. She looked at her reflection in the dark liquid of her coffee. Her fiery red hair was tied back in a severe, practical knot. Her green eyes, the same eyes as her son's, were sharp, but ringed with deep, bruised exhaustion. She was a soldier who had won the war, but lost her peace. "You need to sleep, Lily." Remus Lupin emerged from the shadows of the armory. A heavy tactical map rolled under his arm. He looked older, his face lined with grief and the silver scars of his lycanthropy. Yet there was a new stillness to him. With Sirius gone, sacrificed to break the Lestrange curse, Remus had fundamentally changed. The frantic, self-loathing werewolf was dead. In his place stood the tactician. He had accepted the wolf, integrated its predatory patience into his human mind, filling the massive, agonizing void Sirius had left behind. "Sleep is a luxury we don't have, Remus," Lily said, her voice raspy but ironclad. "Harry is inbound. He signaled 5 minutes ago. He has the manifest." Remus unrolled the map across the table, pinning it down with heavy brass compasses. If the intel is correct, that ledger is going to light up the global underworld. Every crime syndicate, rogue state, and dark wizarding faction will be scrambling to secure Voldemort's leftovers. "Which is why we get to them first," Lily replied, her gaze hardening. "We don't secure them. We don't lock them away in the Department of Mysteries so some corrupt bureaucrat can study them. We break them. We burn them to ash." The rear cargo ramp of the plane whined as it lowered. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and jet fuel. Harry walked up the ramp, his movements completely silent despite his heavy combat boots. He didn't say a word. He walked straight to the table and tossed the black leather ledger onto the map. Remus opened it, his amber eyes scanning the columns of ciphered runes. His wolf-enhanced vision allowed him to process the intricate codes faster than any standard deciphering spell. For several long minutes, the only sound in the plane was the hum of the magical generators. "It's worse than we thought," Remus finally said, his voice dropping an octave. "It's not just wands or cursed necklaces. These are weapons of mass destruction. Biological agents brewed in the First War. Arithmantic explosives." He tapped a specific entry on the page. "And this one, the Echo of Babel. What is it?" Harry asked, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. "A mind-destroying artifact," Remus explained, tracing the coordinates. "Capable of rendering a population the size of London entirely brain-dead in a matter of seconds. It was supposed to be in a secure vault in the Alps, but the ledger shows it was moved a week ago." "Moved where?" Lily asked, standing up, ignoring the burning ache in her chest. Remus looked up, his expression grim. "Hong Kong, the ghost market. And according to this transit schedule, it's being auctioned off to the highest bidder in 48 hours. Lily didn't hesitate. "Prep the gear. We're going to China." Hong Kong's magical district didn't exist on any map, Muggle or magical. It existed in the gaps between reality, a sprawling, vertical slum built into the negative space of the city's towering skyscrapers. It was known as the Ghost Market, a chaotic maze of neon signs bleeding into perpetual, torrential rain. It smelled of roasted duck, illegal potion fumes, and the sharp tang of raw, unfiltered magic. The Obsidian Protocol team moved through the crowded, narrow alleyways. They wore civilian clothing layered over magically woven Kevlar. The inhabitants of the Ghost Market gave them a wide berth. There was a predatory aura radiating from the trio that even the most hardened dark wizards recognized and instinctively avoided. "Comm check," Lily murmured into the transceiver hidden in the collar of her jacket. "Lupin online. I'm on the Overwatch." Remus's voice crackled softly in her ear. He was positioned 3 stories up, crouched on a rusting fire escape, a heavy, magically silenced sniper rifle resting on the railing. His wolf senses pierced through the neon glare and heavy rain, mapping the area. "Harry," Lily prompted. In position came the immediate cold reply. Harry was already inside the auction house, a dilapidated theater retrofitted with high-end magical shielding. He had slipped in through a ventilation shaft that was supposedly protected by blood wards. To a kinetic master like Harry, blood wards were just brittle glass waiting to be shattered. Lily walked toward the front entrance of the theater. Two massive bouncers, half-troll and heavily armed with enchanted repeating crossbows, blocked the rusted iron doors. "Invitation," one of them grunted in rough Mandarin. Lily didn't stop walking. "I'm not here to buy," she said in flawless, magically translated English. She didn't break stride. As she closed the distance, she let the Ignis Anima flare just a fraction. The air around her superheated instantly. The rainwater hitting her shoulders instantly vaporized into steam. The bouncers instinctively stepped back, intimidated by the sheer, suffocating pressure of the dark magic radiating from the slight woman. By the time they realized they had moved, Lily had already pushed past them, stepping into the dark, smoke-filled auditorium. The theater was packed. Representatives from the Italian magical mafia, rogue Russian warlords, and heavily tattooed triad bosses sat in velvet booths, their eyes fixed on the stage. In the center, illuminated by a single harsh spotlight, was a glass containment unit. Inside rested the echo of Babel, a jagged, obsidian tuning fork that seemed to absorb the light around it. Lily slipped into the shadows at the back of the room, her hand resting on the grip of her heavily modified, spell-firing assault rifle slung under her coat. "I see the package," Lily whispered. "Harry, do you have eyes?" "Affirmative," Harry replied. He was in the rafters directly above the stage, suspended by kinetic tethers. 20 armed guards. 5 ward weavers surrounding the stage. The triad boss running the auction is heavily shielded. "Hold position. We wait for the bidding to start, then we strike during the distraction." "Wait." Remus's voice cut through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Lily, you have incoming. 6 o'clock. Fast and organized. They aren't locals." Before Lily could turn, she felt the cold, unmistakable press of a wand tip against her spine. "Keep your hands away from your coat, ma'am," a crisp, American voice whispered in her ear. "Turn around." Slowly, Lily turned, her face a mask of absolute calm despite the adrenaline spiking in her veins. Standing behind her were 4 individuals wearing impeccably tailored dark suits over tactical body armor. They wore fedoras that cast shadows over their eyes, and their wands were drawn, trained precisely on her vital organs. Yakuza, the Magical Congress of the United States of America. The man who had his wand on her spine was tall, with a jawline carved from granite and eyes like cold steel. He flipped open a leather badge wallet. "Special Agent Graves, Yakuza Department of Extranormal Operations. You're out of your jurisdiction, Mrs. Potter." Lily didn't flinch at the use of her name. "And you are a long way from New York, Agent Graves. The ghost market isn't exactly American soil. We're tracking an unregistered weapon of mass destruction," Graves said softly, pressing the wand slightly harder against her back. "We have intel that the Potters have gone rogue, building a private army, amassing dark artifacts. You're coming with us." Lily let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Building a private army? Amassing artifacts? You think we want that garbage?" She leaned in closer, the tip of his wand digging into her jacket. "We aren't here to steal it, Graves. We're here to break it." "I can't let you do that," Graves replied, his jaw tight. "That artifact is evidence. It needs to be secured in an American vault. The last time something was secured in a vault, half of Britain burned," Lily snapped, her eyes flashing with a dangerous green light. "I am not asking for your permission, Agent. I'm giving you a warning. You're surrounded, Mrs. Potter," one of the other agents hissed. "You're outnumbered." "Am I?" Lily tilted her head. Up in the rafters, Harry dropped a fraction of an inch. He didn't make a sound, but the kinetic pressure in the room suddenly shifted. The Yakuza agents felt a sudden, crushing weight bear down on their shoulders. The air grew thick, making it difficult to breathe. "Look up, Agent Graves," Lily whispered. Graves risked a glance upward. In the deep shadows of the ceiling, he saw a pair of glowing emerald eyes looking back down at him. There was no humanity in that gaze, only the terrifying calculation of a predator. "My son is currently calculating exactly how much kinetic force it will take to snap the necks of your entire squad simultaneously," Lily said, her voice dropping to a deadly purr. "He estimates it will take him 0.4 seconds. Do you want to test his math?" Graves swallowed hard, the oppressive weight in the room confirming her threat. He lowered his wand, though he didn't holster it. "What's the play, Potter?" "A truce," Lily demanded. "You and your agents stand down. You let us do what we do best. If you interfere, we will treat you as hostiles." Graves weighed his options. He knew the files on the Potters. He knew what they had done to the Lestranges in America. They weren't just wizards anymore. They were a tactical force of nature. "Fine." Graves gritted his teeth. "But if this goes south, we step in." "If this goes south," Lily said, turning her attention back to the stage, "there won't be a continent left for you to step onto." On the stage, the Triad boss raised a glowing gavel. "The bidding for the Echo of Babel begins now." "Harry," Lily said into the comms. "Execute." The theater erupted into chaos before the first bid could even be shouted. Harry detached his kinetic tethers and dropped from the rafters like a stone. He didn't aim for the floor. He aimed directly for the heavy glass containment unit holding the artifact. As he fell, he gathered raw kinetic energy around his boots. The impact was equivalent to a bunker-busting missile. The reinforced glass shattered outward in a concussive shockwave that sent the ward weavers flying backward. The Triad boss screamed in shock, reaching for his wand, but Harry was already moving. He didn't bother drawing a weapon. He stepped inside the boss's guard and delivered an open palm strike to his chest. The kinetic pulse shattered the man's ribs and sent him flying off the stage into the front row of seats. "Protocol is active. Engage," Lily shouted over the comms. She threw off her coat, bringing her customized assault rifle to bear. It wasn't loaded with bullets. It fired condensed, armor-piercing kinetic bolts. She laid down a suppressing fire of blue-white energy, pinning down the Triad guards rushing the stage. The deafening thump-thump-thump of her weapon echoed over the screams of the fleeing audience. Up on the fire escape, Remus's sniper rifle barked a muffled cough. A Triad sniper hidden in the opposite balcony slumped over the railing, a neat, cauterized hole through his shoulder. "Balcony is clear," Remus reported calmly. "You have hostiles moving in from the eastern stairwell." "I see them," Lily replied, pivoting fluidly and firing a burst that shattered the stairwell door, sending 3 heavily armed warlords diving for cover. Down on the stage, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The Italian mafia representatives had realized they were losing the prize and drew their wands, firing a volley of killing curses toward Harry. "Graves?" Lily yelled, ducking behind a marble pillar as a green curse scorched the stone inches from her face. To his credit, the Yakuza agent didn't hesitate. "Covering fire." Graves roared to his squad. The American agents fanned out, casting synchronized, high-level shield charms and returning fire with precision stunners, catching the mafia wizards in a crossfire. The 3-way firefight turned the theater into a strobe-lit hellscape of flying magic, shattered neon, and kinetic explosions. In the center of the storm, Harry remained terrifyingly calm. He reached out and grabbed the obsidian tuning fork. The moment his fingers brushed the dark metal, a screeching, psychic feedback looped directly into his brain. The Echo of Babel was trying to tear his mind apart. Harry gritted his teeth, blood trickling from his nose. He could hear the screams of millions, the dark magic attempting to burrow into his sanity. But Harry's mind was a fortress forged in trauma and hardened by war. He forced the psychic intrusion back, funneling his own violent, kinetic energy down his arm and into the artifact. "Harry, it's getting too hot down here," Lily yelled over the din of battle, slapping a fresh magical magazine into her rifle. "Destroy it!" Harry poured every ounce of force he had into the tuning fork. The obsidian began to vibrate violently, glowing with a sickly purple light. The runes on Harry's arms flared an angry, blinding red. He raised the artifact above his head and brought it down against the solid steel floor of the stage with earth-shattering force. Crack. The sound was deafening, a physical blow that knocked everyone in the room off their feet. A shockwave of inverted magic rippled outward, extinguishing every light, every neon sign, and every active spell in the building. Darkness slammed down like a physical weight. For 5 agonizing seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, the emergency backup lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow over the ruined theater. The Mafia was unconscious. The Triad guards were groaning on the floor. The Yakuza agents were slowly picking themselves up, their shields shattered. On the stage, Harry stood amidst a crater of warped steel. At his feet lay the pulverized, harmless dust of the Echo of Babel. He wiped the blood from his nose and looked up at Graves. "Evacuate," Harry's voice echoed in the silent room, cold and absolute. Lily stepped out from behind the pillar, her rifle lowered but still primed. "It's been a pleasure doing business, Agent Graves. Don't follow us." Before Graves could issue a command, Harry raised his hand, unleashing a localized kinetic blast that shattered the theater's massive skylight. Rain poured into the auditorium. In the confusion of falling glass and water, Harry grabbed Lily's arm. With a crack of displaced air, they apparat, vanishing into the storm. When Graves finally looked up, the stage was empty. The weapon was destroyed. The Potters were gone. High above the city, in the stealth-cloaked cargo plane, Harry and Lily materialized. Remus was already at the controls, firing up the engines. Lily slumped against the bulkhead, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the ignis anima burned fiercely beneath her skin, punishing her for the exertion. Harry didn't look at her. He couldn't. If he acknowledged her pain, his carefully constructed walls would crumble. He walked to the tactical map, staring at the remaining coordinates in the ledger. "One down," Harry said, his voice hollow. "Set a course for Japan. We have a Yakuza syndicate to hunt." Tokyo did not welcome them. It swallowed them whole. The magical district of Neo-Tokyo, known to the locals as Yominomaki, the city of the underworld, was entirely subterranean. It was a sprawling, multi-tiered labyrinth built directly into the cavernous spaces beneath the Muggle subway networks. Here, the ancient traditions of Eastern magic collided violently with cutting-edge Muggle technology. Holographic koi fish swam through the humid, neon-lit air, projecting advertisements for illegal potion augmentations, while spirit-bound fiber-optic cables pulsed with digitized ley-line energy along the concrete walls. The Obsidian Protocol team moved through the lower levels, blending perfectly into the crowded, rain-slicked thoroughfares. The ambient noise was deafening, a synthesized symphony of synthesized shamisen music, the roar of maglev commuter pods, and the endless chatter of a million illicit deals. "This is a nightmare for standard warding," Remus muttered, his eyes darting across the neon canopy. He was wearing a dark, high-collared trench coat that concealed his tactical rig. "The magical frequency here is constantly shifting. They're running spells through proxy servers and routing wards through encrypted Muggle mainframes. It's cyber magic." "It makes them arrogant," Harry replied. His voice was a flat, emotionless hum over their encrypted comms. He was a shadow moving through the neon glare, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. "They think their tech makes them untouchable. It just gives them more systems to break." At the center of their diamond formation walked Lily. She was heavily disguised under a localized perception filter, but the strain was evident. The ignis anima curse was fighting the ambient magical static of the city, flaring violently beneath her collar. Every few steps, a tremor racked her frame. "Target confirmed," Lily rasped, pushing through the pain. She tapped a holographic schematic projected from her wrist gauntlet. "The Kuroryu Syndicate. Black Dragon. They've monopolized the dark artifact trade in the Pacific Rim. According to the Berlin Ledger, they purchased a Class A extinction-level asset from a defecting Russian warlock 3 weeks ago." "We need to know where they're keeping it," Remus said, pulling his collar up against the artificial subterranean drizzle. The syndicate operates out of a decentralized network. Their main databanks are housed in a magically sealed server farm in the Shinjuku subsector. Can you breach it? Harry asked. Remus's lips curled into a predatory, albeit weary, smile. His amber eyes caught the light of a passing neon sign, flashing with the suppressed instinct of the wolf. They built a fortress of code and math, but they forgot that underneath it all, magic still leaves a scent. Give me an hour. Do it, Lily ordered. Harry, you're on retrieval. We need leverage to force their network open. Find Kenjiro, the syndicate's chief enforcer. Cut off the head, and the body will panic. I will establish a mobile overwatch and monitor the local ministry chatter. We stay dark, we stay fast. Move. They splintered instantly, 3 phantoms vanishing into the chaotic sprawl of the cybermagical undercity. The Shinjuku subsector data farm wasn't guarded by men with wands. It was guarded by autonomous, spirit-infused sentry turrets and a localized, lethal bioelectric ward. The facility looked like a brutalist concrete bunker suspended over a chasm of glowing exhaust vents. Remus crouched on a steel I-beam directly above the main cooling shaft. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply through his nose. The wolf within him didn't just smell blood or fear. It smelled the ozone tang of high-voltage hexes, the bitter copper scent of digital firewalls, and the sickly sweet aroma of the bound spirits powering the security grid. 3 rotational turrets. 2 spirit wards overlapping the primary airlock. Remus drew a specialized tool from his chest rig, a heavy, brass-plated cylinder etched with deeply carved Norse runes. It wasn't a wand. It was a kinetic codebreaker, a device Harry had engineered to violently force physical law onto magical concepts. He dropped from the beam, his coat billowing silently. He landed in the blind spot between 2 panning turrets. Before the sensors could register his thermal signature, Remus slammed the brass cylinder against the reinforced steel door of the airlock. He didn't cast an unlocking charm. He twisted the cylinder, activating the runic array. A concentrated, silent pulse of kinetic force shot directly into the locking mechanism. Instead of breaking the lock, the pulse scrambled the physical alignment of the tumblers, while simultaneously emitting a localized EMP that temporarily blinded the spirit wards. The door hissed open with a pressurized sigh. Remus slipped inside. The server room was a cathedral of blinking lights and towering black obelisks, kept at a freezing temperature to prevent the Magitech from melting down. Cables thick as anacondas snaked across the floor, pulsing with raw data and digitized spellwork. He approached the central terminal. A heavy, red holographic padlock hovered over the console, tethered to a lethal blood curse. Any unauthorized attempt to slice the system would result in immediate, agonizing necrosis of the hacker's hands. Remus smiled grimly. He wasn't going to hack it, he was going to bleed it. He unsheathed a silver combat knife, the blade inscribed with ancient Celtic containment runes. He sliced a shallow, precise cut across his left palm. The blood welled up, dark, thick, and carrying the dormant, terrifying curse of lycanthropy. He pressed his bleeding palm directly into the holographic lock. The machine shrieked, a high-pitched digital squeal of errors. The pristine, mathematical perfection of the Yakuza's security code was suddenly flooded with the chaotic, primal, biological virus of the werewolf's blood magic. The system couldn't categorize the threat. The red padlock flickered violently, turned a sickly, corrupted yellow, and shattered into pixels. "I'm in," Remus whispered over the comms, his fingers flying across the physical keyboard, rapidly downloading the syndicate's heavily encrypted transport manifests onto a crystal drive. "Pulling the architectural blueprints and transit schedules now." "Copy that, Lupin," Lily's voice crackled. "Be fast. They'll notice the system anomaly." "Almost done." "Wait." Remus frowned, his eyes scanning the rapid cascade of data scrolling across the screen. "I'm looking at their high-priority transit logs. The artifact isn't in Tokyo. It's never been in Tokyo." "Explain." Harry's voice cut in, cold and sharp. "They're moving it," Remus said, ripping the crystal drive from the console as emergency klaxons began to wail throughout the bunker. Red strobe lights washed over his scarred face. Tonight, they're using the Mugen Express, a subterranean maglev train, to transport the asset to a naval extraction point on the coast. If it gets on a submarine, we lose it forever. Understood, Harry replied. I will acquire the exact carriage number from the enforcer. Get out of there, Remus. The Golden Lotus was a sanctuary of old-world tradition floating above the neon grime of the lower levels. It was a high-end tea house constructed entirely of magically preserved cedar wood and sliding shoji screens, reserved exclusively for the elite lieutenants of the Kuro Ryu. Kenjiro sat at the head of a low table, sipping matcha from a porcelain cup. He was a heavily modified wizard. Half of his face was covered in a sleek, obsidian cybernetic plate that enhanced his magical targeting, and both of his arms were grafted with runic tattoos that functioned as internalized wand cores. He didn't need a stick of wood to kill. He was the weapon. He was flanked by 4 heavily armed bodyguards, their hands resting on the hilts of magic-coated wakizashis. Outside, the artificial rain drummed against the cedar roof. Inside, the paper of the far shoji screen suddenly turned black, rotting outward in a perfect circle before disintegrating into ash. Harry stepped through the ruined screen. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, inevitable gravity of an executioner. He wore no armor, only his dark tactical clothing, his hands empty but radiating a suffocating kinetic pressure that made the tea in Kenjiro's cup ripple. Kill him, Kenjiro ordered, not even bothering to stand. The 4 bodyguards moved with terrifying, synchronized speed. They drew their blades, steel-coated in searing, bright blue cutting hexes, and lunged across the tatami mats. Harry didn't blink. He sidestepped the first thrust, his hand snapping out to grab the guard's wrist. He channeled a localized kinetic shockwave directly into the man's radius bone. The bone shattered with a sickening crack, the kinetic force traveling up the arm and violently dislocating the shoulder. The guard collapsed instantly. The second and third guards attacked simultaneously from opposite sides. Harry dropped to one knee, sliding beneath the arc of their blades. From his boots, he released a radial kinetic burst across the floorboards. The shockwave swept the legs out from under the guards, launching them into the air. Before they hit the ground, Harry drew 2 blackened, runic combat knives from his thigh sheaths. With brutal, economical movements, he drove the hilts of the knives into their temples, rendering them unconscious. The 4th guard hesitated, his eyes wide with sudden terror. That hesitation was his downfall. Harry threw one of his knives. It didn't spin. It flew straight and true, driven by an invisible kinetic railgun effect, embedding itself to the hilt in the wall mere millimeters from the guard's ear, pinning him by the collar. The sheer force knocked the wind out of the man, dropping him to his knees. In less than 4 seconds, Kenjiro was alone. The Yakuza lieutenant finally stood, his cybernetic eye whirring as it locked onto Harry. You are the ghost from Berlin. The British anomaly. Kenjiro raised his right arm. The runic tattoos along his skin glowed a blinding, nuclear blue. He swung his arm in a wide arc, unleashing a scythe of compressed, superheated plasma that tore through the tea tables, incinerating the wood instantly. Harry didn't try to dodge. He raised his left arm, crossing it in front of his face. The defensive runes scarred into his flesh flared a brilliant emerald green. The plasma scythe collided with his kinetic shield. The impact was deafening, filling the room with blinding light and a shockwave that blew out every remaining shoji screen. When the smoke cleared, Harry was still standing, his sleeve burned away, but his runic shield holding firm. My turn, Harry whispered. He closed the distance in a blur of motion. Kenjiro tried to fire another blast, but Harry parried the man's arm with his remaining combat knife. The runic metal of the blade clashed against the cybernetic flesh, sparking violently. Harry pivoted, driving his elbow upward into Kenjiro's chin. The kinetic impact scrambled the enforcer's equilibrium. Before Kenjiro could recover, Harry grabbed him by the throat, hoisting the heavy man off the floor with unnatural strength. He slammed Kenjiro against the cedar wall, the kinetic force cracking the timber. "The Mugen Express," Harry said, his voice a lethal, vibrating hum. "Which carriage holds the asset?" Kenjiro choked, his cybernetic eye frantically trying to compute the sheer physical force pinning him down. You can't stop it. Carriage 4. Heavy armor. You are dead, British." "I have been for a long time," Harry replied softly. He squeezed his fingers precisely over the carotid artery, cutting off the blood flow to Kenjiro's brain. The lieutenant went limp. Harry dropped the unconscious body, retrieved his second knife from the wall, and vanished back into the rain. Harry moved through the maintenance tunnels beneath the tea house, navigating by memory and the schematic Remus had patched to his retinal display. He needed to reach the extraction point, a ventilation shaft that led back to the upper levels. He turned a corner and stopped dead. Standing at the end of the narrow, concrete corridor was a figure draped in a heavy, ministry-issue tactical trench coat. The man held a wand steady in his right hand, the tip glowing with a pristine, bright lumos charm. The light illuminated a face that Harry hadn't seen in over 5 years. Terry Boot. He was older now, the soft edges of the Ravenclaw boy replaced by the hard, stress lines of a veteran Or. He wore the insignia of the International Magical Cooperation Task Force. "Don't move, Harry," Terry commanded. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the rigid stance of his body. "Hands where I can see them. By the authority of the British Ministry of Magic and the International Confederation, you are under arrest." Harry didn't move. He stared at his old classmate, a phantom pain echoing in his chest. Terry represented a life, a world, that Harry had sacrificed to keep safe. Terry represented the innocence that the Obsidian Protocol was designed to protect, even if it meant becoming monsters in their eyes. "You shouldn't be here, Terry," Harry said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth they had once shared in the common rooms of Hogwarts. "We got a tip from Yakuza," Terry said, his wand hand shaking just a fraction. "They said you were in Hong Kong. They said you've gone dark, Harry. Stealing artifacts. Operating outside international law. The minister wants to help you. We can bring you in, get you treatment." "Treatment," Harry echoed, a bitter, micro-expression crossing his face. "You think I'm sick? You think this is a breakdown? Look at you, Harry," Terry shouted, desperation leaking into his voice. "You're a mass murderer. The Lestranges, the people in Berlin, you're slaughtering your way across the globe. You're becoming the very thing we fought against." Harry took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Stay back," Terry warned, shifting his stance. "I know what you can do. I know you don't use a wand anymore. I will curse you if I have to." "You don't understand the board, Terry," Harry said, taking another step. The distance between them was closing. "You see the pieces, but you don't see the game. Voldemort left a vacuum. If we don't burn his legacy to ash, the syndicates will use it to burn the world. The ministry is too slow, too bureaucratic. You negotiate. We execute. That's not justice. It's survival." Terry steeled himself, his eyes hardening with tragic resolve. "I'm sorry, Harry." Stupefy Maxima. A massive, red bolt of stunning magic erupted from Terry's wand, filling the narrow corridor. Harry didn't dodge. He didn't even raise his arms. He simply stepped into the spell. He altered his internal kinetic frequency to match the wavelength of the stunning charm. The red energy washed over him, parting around his body like water around a stone, completely neutralizing the magic before it could take effect. Terry stared in absolute horror.
"How?"
Before Terry could cast a second spell, Harry was in front of him. Harry moved with a sorrowful, blinding speed. He didn't strike Terry with brutal force. Instead, he reached out, his hand snapping to Terry's wand wrist. With a precise, twisting motion, he disarmed the Or, tossing the wand aside. Simultaneously, his other hand shot out, 2 fingers pressing sharply into a cluster of nerve endings at the base of Terry's neck. It was a localized kinetic dampener, a technique designed to overload the nervous system without causing permanent damage. Terry's eyes rolled back, his body instantly going limp. Harry caught him before he hit the concrete floor, lowering him gently against the wall. Harry knelt there for a second, looking at the unconscious face of his friend. "I'm sorry, Terry," he whispered into the damp silence of the tunnel. "But the world needs an executioner more than it needs a hero." He stood up, his face hardening back into an emotionless mask. "Lily, I have the carriage number. Move the plane. We're intercepting the train." The Mugen Express was a marvel of Magi-Tech engineering. It was a sleek, armored serpent of black steel, hovering entirely on an electromagnetic and ley-line repulsion rail. It tore through the midnight Japanese countryside at a staggering 400 kilometers per hour, blurring past mountains and rice paddies like a phantom. 2,000 feet above it, the cloaked Soviet cargo plane matched its speed, shuddering violently against the extreme wind resistance. "We only have a 3-minute window before the train enters the coastal subterranean tunnels," Remus shouted over the roar of the plane's engines, fighting the yoke to keep them steady. "I'm dropping you directly over carriage 4. You'll be hitting the roof at terminal velocity." In the cargo bay, the rear ramp was lowered, revealing a swirling abyss of black clouds and rain. Harry and Lily stood at the edge, tethered to the ceiling by heavy kinetic cables. Lily's face was deathly pale, the ignis anima glowing fiercely through her jacket as she drew upon its cursed energy to sustain her failing body. She held her customized assault rifle tight against her chest. "We breach, we secure the asset data, we extract," Lily shouted, her voice cutting through the wind. "No heroics, Harry. Pure efficiency." "Understood. Drop in 3, 2, 1, go," Remus roared. Harry and Lily threw themselves out into the blackness. The wind hit them like a physical wall, tearing at their clothes and threatening to rip them apart. They plummeted through the storm, the sleek black roof of the train racing along the tracks below them, looking no wider than a razor blade. Harry extended his hands, focusing intensely. He projected a kinetic drag chute, catching the air resistance and violently decelerating their fall. They slammed onto the roof of carriage 4. The impact was brutal, the metal groaning beneath their boots. At 400 kilometers per hour, the wind was a hurricane trying to throw them off. Harry clamped his boots to the metal using magnetic kinetic adhesion. Lily dropped to one knee, anchoring herself to Harry's belt. "Breaching," Harry yelled over the deafening roar. He placed both hands flat against the armored roof of the train. He didn't try to peel the metal back. He commanded the kinetic energy of the train's own forward momentum, redirecting it downward. Crunch. A massive, circular hole blew inward, the thick steel yielding to the impossible pressure. Harry and Lily dropped through the breach, landing heavily in the luxurious, velvet-lined interior of the carriage. They weren't alone. Carriage 4 was the heavy armor division. Waiting for them were 12 elite Yakuza enforcers, heavily armed with rapid-fire magical repeating rifles and clad in runic body armor. At the far end of the carriage sat a massive, reinforced tungsten safe. "Contact!" Lily screamed. She didn't hesitate. She hit the floor, sliding behind an overturned mahogany table, and opened fire. Her rifle barked, spitting armor-piercing kinetic bolts that tore through the plush interior. 2 enforcers were thrown backward, their runic armor shattering under the concentrated fire. The Yakuza returned fire, filling the narrow confines of the carriage with a blinding storm of curses, explosive hexes, and plasma bolts. The noise was apocalyptic in the enclosed space. Harry didn't take cover. He walked straight down the center aisle. He was a hurricane of localized violence. He deflected a killing curse with a swipe of his runic knife, the green light ricocheting into the ceiling. An enforcer lunged at him with an electrified baton. Harry grabbed the weapon, absorbed the electrical charge, and kinetically expelled it back into the man's chest, throwing him through the reinforced glass window and out into the night. Lily provided flawless suppressive fire, her military precision keeping the remaining enemies pinned down while Harry systematically dismantled their line of defense. It was a terrifying display of synergy, a mother and son forged into a perfect, lethal weapon. Within 60 seconds, the carriage was silent, save for the wind howling through the shattered roof. All 12 enforcers were down. Harry walked to the tungsten safe. "Remus, the lock is arithmantic. Complex." "Blow the hinges," Remus ordered over the comms. "We're 2 minutes from the tunnel." Harry placed his hands on the massive vault door. He poured everything he had into it, his muscles screaming, the runes on his arms burning white-hot. A localized sonic boom echoed through the carriage as the hinges exploded outward. The heavy door crashed to the floor. Inside the safe wasn't the weapon itself, but a glowing, crystal-hard drive, pulsing with a dark, aquatic light. "I have it," Harry said, grabbing the drive. He tossed it to Lily. Lily caught it, pulling a portable decoding slate from her vest and plugging the crystal in. Her eyes widened as she read the decrypted data scrolling across the tiny screen. "Harry," Lily breathed, her voice filled with sudden dread. "The Syndicate didn't buy the weapon to use it. They bought it as a broker. They've already sold it to a splinter cell of the American military." "Where is it?" Harry asked, looking up at the breached roof as the train approached the massive, gaping maw of the mountain tunnel. "It's an arithmantic reality bomb," Lily said, coughing violently as the curse flared again. "And it's been moved to a deep-sea black site. Coordinates point to the Atlantic. The Bermuda Triangle." Remus's voice crackled, grim and tight. "We need to go deep," Lily said, securing the drive. "Protocol. Prepare for extraction." Harry grabbed Lily, wrapping his arm around her waist. He aimed his free hand upward, firing a kinetic grappling tether that locked onto the cargo plane hovering just above the train. With a violent jerk, they were ripped out of the carriage, hoisted into the stormy sky just seconds before the Mugen Express vanished into the blackness of the tunnel. The Yakuza were broken, but the true nightmare was only just beginning. They were heading into the abyss. The Black Market port in Nassau was a graveyard of rusted ships and broken promises, hidden from Muggle satellites by a perpetual, magically induced hurricane. Rain lashed against the docks in horizontal sheets, stinging like gravel. At the end of a rotting pier, a massive, rusted diving vessel bobbed violently in the churning black water. It didn't look like a submarine. It looked like a brutalist iron pillbug, heavily plated and scarred by deep-sea trenches. It was called the Tartarus. Lily stood on the pier, the wind whipping her red hair around her pale, drawn face. She slid a heavy, magically expanded duffel bag across a metal crate. The smuggler, a grizzled warlock with gills grafted onto his neck, unzipped the bag. The faint, golden glow of 300 solid goblin-forged galleons illuminated the rain. It was the absolute last of the Potter fortune. She's fully fueled. The ballast tanks are reinforced with dwarf-forged titanium, and the life support runs on a closed-loop alchemy engine, the smuggler rasped, his gills flaring as he counted the gold. "But I'm warning you, where you're going, standard magic doesn't work. The pressure down in the Bermuda Trench crushes arithmantic fields. Shield charms snap like dry twigs. Wards implode. If the hull breaches, you don't drown. The ocean compresses you into the size of a golf ball in a millisecond." "We understand the physics," Lily said coldly. She grabbed the heavy iron keys from the crate. "Get out of here." 10 minutes later, the Tartarus slipped beneath the violent surface, plunging into the silent, terrifying dark. The interior of the submersible was incredibly cramped, smelling of heavy grease, copper, and recycled oxygen. Red tactical lighting bathed the narrow steel tube. Remus sat at the helm, his hands resting on the dual yoke, his amber eyes locked onto the primitive sonar screen. "Passing 2,000 meters, Remus announced, his voice tight. "We are officially entering the bathypelagic zone. The midnight zone. Sunlight will never reach us here." Harry sat on a steel bench in the rear compartment, meticulously checking the runic etchings on his combat knives. He didn't look out the thick quartz portholes. There was nothing out there but the abyss. Beside him, Lily began to cough. It started as a dry rattle but quickly escalated into a violent, chest-tearing spasm. She doubled over, pressing a rag to her mouth. When she pulled it away, the fabric was stained with thick, black blood that faintly glowed with a sickly, ethereal light. "Lily," Remus murmured, glancing back over his shoulder. "Eyes on the helm, Lupin," Lily gasped, wiping her mouth with the back of her trembling hand. The Ignis Anima curse was raging beneath her collarbone, the fiery lattice of corrupted magic burning brighter the deeper they went. The immense physical pressure of the ocean was actively fighting the magic in her blood, accelerating the curse's consumption of her soul. I'm fine. How much further? The target coordinates are at 6,000 meters, Remus replied, tapping the altimeter. The hadopelagic zone. The crushing depths. We should be seeing the outer perimeter defenses on sonar. Suddenly, the sonar screen flared with a blinding, high-pitched ping. The Tartarus shuddered violently, the engines whining in protest as the submersible was suddenly caught in an invisible, paralyzing grip. The metal hull groaned loudly, the terrifying sound of thick steel beginning to bend. Report. Lily snapped, grabbing a bulkhead to steady herself. We've hit a ward net. Remus shouted, his hands flying across the console, trying to override the propulsion. But they aren't standard magical wards. They're kinetic gravity mines. The ocean pressure is being weaponized. The mine is amplifying the localized gravity around the sub. If we don't disable it, the hull will collapse in less than 4 minutes. Can we shoot it? Lily asked, raising her rifle.
No.
Torpedoes will trigger a sympathetic detonation. The shock wave will crush us instantly. Remus looked back at Harry, his wolfish eyes wide with grim realization. It requires a manual override. Someone has to go out there. Harry stood in the tiny, vertical airlock of the Tartarus. He wasn't wearing a diving suit. A standard atmospheric suit would be instantly crushed at this depth, and magical bubblehead charms would pop under the sheer weight of the ocean. He had to rely on something infinitely more dangerous. Harry stripped off his jacket, standing only in his tactical pants and a skin-tight, thermally insulated undershirt. He raised both arms, revealing the intricate, jagged network of runic scars carved into his flesh. He closed his eyes and began to hyperventilate, flooding his bloodstream with oxygen while simultaneously tapping into the deepest, most violent reserves of his kinetic magic. Harry, listen to me. Remus's voice came through the comm link implanted in Harry's ear. The gravity mine is attached to the exterior hull, right above the exhaust port. You have approximately 90 seconds of oxygen. The kinetic field you're generating will protect you from the pressure, but the cold will slow your heart rate to dangerous levels. Do you copy? I copy, Harry said, his voice eerily calm. He channeled the kinetic force outward, creating a skin-tight, vibrating halo of repelling energy around his entire body. It was an armor of pure force, vibrating so violently that the air around him began to blur. Flooding the airlock. Godspeed, Harry. The outer hatch groaned open. The ocean didn't just rush in. It slammed into Harry like a speeding freight train. The sheer force of the freezing water hitting his kinetic shield felt like being struck by a solid wall of concrete. The cold was absolute, a parasitic entity that instantly tried to bite through his magic and freeze his blood. He was thrust out into the absolute, terrifying blackness of the abyss. There was no up or down. There was only the crushing, infinite dark. The only light came from the dim red glow of the submersible's interior and the faint, menacing blue pulse of the gravity mine clinging to the hull above him. Harry moved clumsily, grabbing the exterior rungs of the sub. Every inch he pulled himself upward required superhuman effort. The ocean was actively trying to rip him away, the artificial gravity of the mine increasing the water density around him to the consistency of liquid lead. His lungs began to burn. 30 seconds. He reached the exhaust port. The mine was a jagged sphere of black iron, pulsing with a lethal blue arithmantic algorithm. It didn't have wires to cut. It was a magical lock powered by blood magic and extreme pressure. Harry anchored his boots magnetically to the hull. He drew his runic combat knife from his thigh sheath. The kinetic shield around him flickered as the freezing cold began to drain his reserves. He didn't have time to decipher the runes. He had to overload them. He pressed the edge of the knife to his own palm and sliced deep. Because of the extreme cold, the blood didn't flow quickly. Harry forced it out, pressing his bleeding hand directly against the pulsing blue core of the gravity mine. He channeled his kinetic energy through his blood, forcing his raw, chaotic magical signature directly into the pristine, mathematical algorithm of the weapon. The mine shrieked, a silent, localized vibration that rattled Harry's teeth in his skull. The blue light turned a sickly, corrupted violet, flashing rapidly as the internal spellwork fought against Harry's intrusion. 60 seconds. His vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced at the edges of his sight. The kinetic shield around his left arm failed for a fraction of a second, and the ocean bit him. The instant shift in pressure cracked his ulna bone with a sickening snap. Harry didn't scream. He merely grit his teeth, pouring the last of his consciousness into his bleeding hand. Crack. The mine went dark. The artificial gravity field instantly dissipated. The sudden release of tension sent the Tartarus bobbing slightly in the water. Harry pushed off the hull, letting the momentum carry him back into the open airlock. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind him. The pumps roared, violently expelling the seawater. Harry collapsed onto the steel grate of the floor, gasping for air, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. The kinetic shield powered down, leaving him shivering uncontrollably in the freezing airlock. The inner door hissed open. Lily was there instantly, pulling him to his feet. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She just grabbed a roll of enchanted medical tape and began violently strapping his broken arm tightly to his chest. "We're moving," Remus shouted from the helm. "Sonar shows a massive structure ahead. We've found the black site." The facility was an abomination of engineering. It was a sprawling, multi-domed military installation built directly onto the ocean floor, anchored to a thermal vent that spewed black, boiling sulfur into the freezing water. It looked like a metal parasite feeding on the Earth's crust. Remus piloted the Tartarus with surgical precision, guiding the rusted sub into a concealed docking bay at the base of the primary dome. The moment the umbilical docking clamp locked into place with a heavy metallic thud, the entire team moved into tactical positions. "This is a rogue military splinter cell," Lily said, checking the chamber of her kinetic assault rifle. "They are heavily armed, highly trained, and fanatic. They expect standard magical engagement. We're going to give them a meat grinder." She looked at Harry. His left arm was strapped tight, useless. He held his remaining combat knife in his right hand. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, lost entirely to the combat trance of the Obsidian Protocol. "Breaching in 3, Remus said, racking the slide of a massive, magically modified trench shotgun.
2.
1. Remus hit the release. The airlock door blew outward, propelled by a concentrated kinetic blast from Harry. The heavy steel door flew down the docking corridor like a frisbee, decapitating the first 2 guards standing in the hallway before slamming into the far bulkhead. "Clear," Lily shouted, stepping out of the sub and immediately opening fire. The facility's corridors were narrow, utilitarian steel, bathed in flashing red emergency lights and screaming alarms. It was a fatal funnel, a claustrophobic nightmare for a firefight. Lily took point, her rifle spitting rapid-fire blue kinetic bolts. She didn't use cover. She became a wall of suppressing fire, advancing down the corridor with flawless, terrifying military pacing. 2 heavily armored guards stepped around a corner, raising wands to cast explosive hexes. Lily's bolts tore through their tactical vests before the first syllable of their incantations left their lips, throwing them backward in a spray of blood and shattered armor. "Left flank," Remus roared. A squad of 5 soldiers tried to ambush them from across corridor. Remus didn't shoot. He let the wolf take the wheel. He dropped his shotgun, lunging forward with unnatural, terrifying speed. He hit the first soldier like a freight train, his claws extending. In the tight confines of the hallway, his brutality was absolute. He grabbed a soldier by the tactical vest and threw him directly into his comrades, the sheer physical force shattering bones and crushing windpipes. He picked up his shotgun with one hand and fired a concentrated blast of buckshot enchanted with dragonfire, incinerating the remaining 3 men in a contained, horrific inferno. Harry walked behind them, the silent executioner. Any guard that managed to slip past Lily's fire or Remus's rage met Harry's blade. A soldier dropped from an overhead ventilation shaft, aiming a pistol at Lily's back. Without breaking stride, Harry threw his knife. The runic blade buried itself precisely in the soldier's throat, pinning him to the ceiling. Harry casually yanked the knife free as he walked past, letting the body drop to the grated floor. They moved like a single, devastating organism. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they slaughtered their way through the elite radical faction. They reached a massive set of blast doors at the end of the primary concourse. Above the doors, painted in stark white letters, were the words, Project Kronos, Main Control. "The arithmantic bomb is in there," Lily said, her breathing heavy, the ignis anima bleeding a terrifying heat through her damp clothes. "I'm breaching," Harry said softly. He placed his right hand against the center of the blast doors. He didn't use an explosive pulse. He used a sustained, localized kinetic vibration, matching the resonant frequency of the reinforced steel. The heavy doors began to hum, then violently rattle, before finally tearing themselves apart at the molecular level, collapsing into a pile of smoking metallic sand. They stepped into the control room. The main control room was a breathtaking, horrifying space. The far wall was a massive, semi-spherical dome of thick quartz glass, looking directly out into the black abyss of the Bermuda Trench. Giant halogen floodlights illuminated the churning, freezing water outside. In the center of the room stood the weapon. It was a nightmare of geometry. A massive, spinning gyroscope of brass and glowing blue arithmantic crystals, suspended over a pool of highly volatile liquid magic. The air in the room tasted like ozone and static. Standing in front of the machine was General Vance. He wore a pristine, unblemished military uniform, his hands clasped casually behind his back. He didn't look afraid. He looked triumphant. "The infamous Potters," Vance said, his voice echoing cleanly across the massive chamber. "I must admit, the casualty reports I was receiving on your ascent through my facility were staggering. You truly are the monsters the Ministry paints you to be." Lily kept her rifle leveled at the general's head. "Shut down the machine, Vance. It's over." "Over?" Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He gestured to the spinning gyroscope. "Mrs. Potter, it hasn't even begun. Do you know what this is?" The Yakuza thought it was a bomb. Idiots. They lack vision. It is an arithmantic reality engine. "It alters the timeline," Remus growled, keeping his shotgun trained on the shadows, his wolf senses screaming that this was a setup. "It erases," Vance corrected him, his eyes shining with fanatical zeal. "The magical statute of secrecy is a failure. We live in the shadows like rats, while muggles pollute the earth. The magic in this world is dying. This engine, once fully charged, will release an arithmantic wave that rewrites the fundamental equations of the last century. It will erase the Muggle technological revolution. It will place magical kind back at the apex of the food chain, openly and permanently." "You'll kill billions," Harry said, his voice dead. "I will save our species," Vance countered. "And I cannot allow the Obsidian Protocol to interfere." Vance pressed a single, hidden button on his uniform cuff. Instantly, a heavy, translucent barrier of pure magical force slammed down from the ceiling, dividing the room in half. Harry, Lily, and Remus were trapped near the glass observation wall, while Vance and the machine were sealed safely on the other side. Lily fired a burst from her rifle. The kinetic bolts hit the barrier and harmlessly absorbed into the magic. "A localized Aegis shield," Vance smiled. "Powered directly by the thermal vents below the facility. You cannot break it. But that is not the trap." Vance pressed a second button on the main console. A heavy, mechanical groaning echoed through the chamber. The massive titanium shutters that usually protected the quartz glass dome began to retract, fully exposing the room to the ocean. "The quartz glass is incredibly strong," Vance said calmly, walking toward the rear exit of the control room. "But it requires constant, magically sustained pressure equalization to survive the weight of 6,000 meters of ocean. I have just disabled the equalization." A terrifying, high-pitched crack echoed through the room. Harry looked at the massive glass dome. A jagged, spiderweb fracture had appeared directly in the center of the quartz. Water began to weep from the microscopic crack. "The glass will catastrophically fail in approximately 3 minutes," Vance said, stepping into the elevator behind the machine. When it does, the ocean will enter this room with the force of a nuclear detonation. You won't drown. You will be atomized by the pressure. Goodbye, Potters. The elevator doors closed. Crack. A second fracture appeared. The glass groaned loudly, bowing inward under the incomprehensible weight of the sea. Remus, break the shield. Lily screamed, spinning around. Remus slammed his kinetic codebreaker against the Aegis barrier. He twisted it, dumping raw power into the shield. The barrier rippled, but held firm. It's drawing power from the Earth itself. I can't overload it. It will take me 10 minutes to decipher the arithmantic sequence. We don't have 10 minutes, Harry said, staring at the cracking glass. We have 2. The room began to shake violently. Water started spraying through the fractures in high-pressure jets, sharp enough to cut through flesh. The deafening roar of the ocean pressing against the dying glass was overwhelming. Lily lowered her rifle. She looked at the cracking dome, then at the Aegis barrier separating them from the weapon's core. She made her choice. Harry, Lily said, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute, terrifying clarity. The core of that machine is a localized arithmantic crystal. If you shatter it, the engine dies, and the Aegis shield will drop. I will buy you the time to do it. Mom, no. Harry stepped forward, his cold facade finally cracking. Panic, raw and human, bled into his green eyes. Lily, don't. Remus yelled, grabbing her arm. Lily threw Remus off with surprising strength. She walked directly toward the failing glass dome. She reached up and grabbed the collar of her tactical jacket, ripping it down to expose her chest and neck. The Ignis Anima was no longer just glowing beneath her skin, it was actively burning. Veins of pure, corrupted fire etched across her pale flesh, a parasitic soul fire that was consuming her life force. You have 2 minutes, Harry, Lily whispered, a single tear cutting through the grime on her face. Do what you were born to do. Execute. Lily slammed both of her hands flat against the cracking quartz glass. She didn't cast a spell. She released the leash on the curse. She weaponized her own death. The Ignis Anima erupted from her body. A shockwave of pure, blinding soul fire washed over the entire dome. The fire didn't burn the glass, it fused with it. It created a blazing, ethereal lattice of protective magic, directly countering the crushing weight of the dark ocean outside. Lily screamed, a sound of absolute, inhuman agony that tore through the control room. The fire was eating her from the inside out to sustain the barrier. She fell to her knees, her hands still pressed to the glass, her back arching in torment. "Mom!" Harry roared, stepping toward her. "Go!" Lily shrieked, her eyes entirely engulfed in white flames. "Break it!" Harry turned away. The grief and terror vanished, instantly replaced by a rage so absolute, so cold, that the air around him began to crystallize. He didn't look human anymore. He was a kinetic demon. He turned to face the Aegis barrier. He didn't try to hack it. He didn't try to find a weakness. He raised his right fist, drawing every single ounce of kinetic force in his body, pulling from the trauma, the pain, and the agonizing screams of his mother. The runes on his arm glowed a blinding, nuclear green, tearing the skin around them. He punched the barrier. The impact sounded like a thunderclap inside a cathedral. The unbreakable Aegis shield, powered by the earth itself, shattered like cheap stained glass. Harry stepped through the falling shards of magic. Standing between him and the machine were 6 elite guards, Vance's personal praetorian, heavily augmented with cybernetics and combat stims. Harry didn't slow down. He didn't use his knife. He became a weapon of mass destruction. He caught the first guard by the throat, channeling a kinetic pulse so violent it severed the man's head from his spine. He ducked under a stream of plasma fire, driving his boot into the knee of the second guard, shattering the joint, before crushing the man's skull with a downward palm strike. He moved in a blur of terrifying, frictionless violence. He was untouchable. He was the Obsidian Protocol made manifest. Bones broke, armor shattered, and bodies flew across the room as Harry ripped through the elite squad in less than 40 seconds. He reached the arithmantic reality engine. The massive gyroscope was spinning rapidly, emitting a high-pitched whine as it prepared to fire its reality-altering wave. In the center of the machine floated the core, a jagged, pulsing blue crystal. Behind him, Lily's screams were dying down, replaced by weak, agonizing gasps. The soul fire on the glass was flickering. The cracks were widening. 10 seconds. Harry plunged his bare right hand directly into the spinning gears of the machine. The raw magical friction stripped the flesh from his knuckles, but he didn't care. He grabbed the arithmantic crystal core. The energy of the bomb immediately began fighting him, sending waves of agonizing, reality-bending radiation up his arm. It tried to erase his hand from existence. Harry gritted his teeth, his blood boiling, and squeezed. With a deafening, reality-tearing crunch, Harry crushed the crystal core in his bare hand. The spinning gyroscope instantly ceased. A massive shockwave of displaced arithmantic energy exploded outward, throwing Harry backward across the room. The lights in the facility died instantly, plunging them into the dim red glow of emergency backups. The machine was dead. The threat was neutralized. Harry scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agonizing burns on his hand. He ran to the glass dome. Lily was slumped on the floor. Her hands had slipped from the glass. The Ignis Anima fire was gone, completely burned out. Her skin was ashen, her breathing shallow and ragged. Harry dropped to his knees, sliding his good arm under her shoulders, pulling her head into his lap. Mom, look at me." Lily's eyes fluttered open. The brilliant green was faded, clouded with exhaustion. She looked up at him, a weak, trembling smile touching her lips. Did you break it?" "I broke it," Harry choked out, his voice cracking. "It's over." Above them, the glass gave a final, terrifying groan. Without Lily's fire to hold it back, the ocean was reclaiming its territory. The massive fractures split wide open. "Remus!" Harry screamed. Remus was already there. He grabbed Lily's legs, Harry holding her shoulders. "Run!" Remus roared. They sprinted for the elevator at the rear of the control room, just as the quartz dome catastrophically failed. Behind them, the ocean exploded into the room, a wall of black water and crushing pressure obliterating everything in its path. They threw themselves into the elevator shaft, Remus sealing the blast doors behind them mere milliseconds before the water hit. The heavy steel buckled inward, but it held. They were alive. The weapon was destroyed. But as Harry looked down at his mother's lifeless, pale face in the dim emergency lighting, he realized the true cost of the Obsidian Protocol. The world was safe, but the Potter family was burning to ash. The escape pod was a pressurized titanium cylinder originally designed to evacuate the deep-sea facility's high command. Now, it was a coffin rocketing toward the surface at a velocity that threatened to snap their spines. Inside the claustrophobic sphere, the emergency lights flickered violently. Remus was braced against the bulkhead, his arms wrapped protectively around Lily's unconscious form. Harry knelt on the grated floor, his right hand clamped tightly around the shattered remains of the arithmantic core. Though the machine was dead, the crushed arithmantic crystal was bleeding. It wasn't a liquid bleed. It was a hemorrhage of pure, unstable reality. A sickly, violet radiation leaked through Harry's fingers, warping the air around his hand. The metal grate beneath his knees was slowly turning to glass, then to sand, then ceasing to exist entirely. The core was trying to execute its programming, attempting to erase the localized space around it. "It's not stable," Harry said, his voice straining against the G-force of their ascent. The runes etched into his right arm were glowing white-hot, violently fighting back the erasing radiation. Breaking the core stopped the global wave, but the residual energy is going critical. If it detonates in here, it will tear a hole in the dimensional fabric. We need a grounding point. A surface ritual. "We're almost at the surface," Remus gritted out, watching the depth gauge spin backward at a dizzying speed. But Vance wouldn't just leave the airspace unguarded. He expected to win. He'll have an extraction fleet waiting.
Boom.
The escape pod breached the surface of the Atlantic like a breaching Leviathan, launching 30 feet into the air before crashing back down into the violent, churning waves of a Category 4 hurricane. The hatch blew open, ripped away by explosive bolts. The storm was absolute chaos. Black rain lashed against them in horizontal sheets, driven by 100-mile-per-hour winds. Lightning tore across the sky, briefly illuminating the nightmare they had surfaced into. They were floating in the shadow of a colossal, abandoned offshore oil rig. It was a monolithic cathedral of rusted iron and groaning steel pipes, towering over the lethal waves. There, Remus roared over the thunder, pointing a massive, clawed finger toward the rig's lowest maintenance platform. Harry grabbed his mother. Despite his broken left arm and the reality-warping crystal burning his right hand, he moved with terrifying efficiency. He channeled a pulse of kinetic energy into his boots and leaped from the sinking pod. He cleared 40 feet of open, violent ocean, landing heavily on the rusted grating of the platform. Remus followed, landing with the heavy, predatory grace of a wolf. "The helipad," Harry ordered, his eyes locked onto the highest point of the rig. "I need open sky and solid iron to ground the radiation. Get her to safety." Harry didn't wait for a response. He began scaling the exterior of the rig, using kinetic adhesion to run vertically up the massive steel pylons, ignoring the hurricane-force winds threatening to throw him back into the sea. Remus hoisted Lily over his shoulder and began the brutal climb up the rusted stairwells. As they ascended, the clouds above them parted, not from the storm, but from displacement. Descending from the thunderheads were a dozen diesel magical gunships. They were brutalist flying fortresses, kept aloft by enchanted turbine engines and heavy levitation runes. Vance's loyalist armada had arrived, and they had locked onto the reality-warping signature of the Bleeding Core. The executioners were cornered. The gunships didn't bother with a warning. A barrage of explosive magical artillery rained down on the rig. Heavy plasma bolts and condensed explosive hexes slammed into the iron infrastructure, tearing away entire walkways and sending showers of molten steel into the ocean below. Remus reached the upper control deck, kicking open the door to a reinforced communication bunker. He laid Lily gently on the floor, sliding his tactical coat off to cover her shivering, dying body. He checked her pulse. It was a faint, terrifyingly erratic flutter. "Stay with me, Lily," Remus whispered, his amber eyes burning with a desperate, feral light. "Just a little longer." The rig shuddered violently as another volley of plasma fire hit the main derrick. Remus stepped out of the bunker and looked up at the helipad. Harry was kneeling in the center of the massive H, using his own blood to paint a complex, massive arithmantic grounding circle. The violet radiation leaking from his hand was growing brighter, violently glitching the rain around him out of existence. He was completely exposed. "They're zeroing in on him," Remus snarled, drawing his wand and his magically modified trench shotgun. It wasn't enough. Small arms wouldn't pierce the heavily warded hulls of those gunships. Remus sprinted across the rain-slicked deck, his wolf senses scanning the rusted debris of the abandoned rig. He found it near the eastern crane, an old, decommissioned rotary flak cannon left behind by whatever Muggle corporation had abandoned the platform decades ago. It was rusted solid, completely useless. Until Remus touched it. Remus didn't just accept his lycanthropy. He weaponized the curse. He slammed his hands onto the rusted iron controls of the cannon. He closed his eyes and let the beast off the chain. A massive, terrifying howl ripped from his throat, echoing over the thunder. It wasn't a human sound. It was the primal roar of an apex predator. He didn't transform his body. He pushed the transfiguration magic outward, bleeding the dark, chaotic energy of the wolf directly into the machine. The rust violently flaked away, replaced by glowing, molten runic veins that spread across the twin barrels of the cannon. The heavy artillery didn't just repair itself. It became an extension of the werewolf. Remus grabbed the targeting yokes. The gun hummed with predatory life. A gunship banked low, opening its side doors to deploy a squad of elite paratroopers on broomsticks, preparing to swarm the helipad. "Not today," Remus growled. He pulled the triggers. The flak cannon didn't fire lead. It fired concentrated, explosive bursts of pure, silver-laced lycanthropic energy. The recoil was devastating, shattering the concrete beneath the gun's mount, but Remus absorbed the shock with his magically enhanced muscles. The first burst tore through the stormy sky. It hit the lead gunship squarely in the port engine. The wolf magic bypassed the standard deflective shields entirely, burying itself in the machinery before detonating. The engine exploded in a massive fireball of green and silver flame, sending the gunship spinning out of control to crash into the violent ocean below. The paratroopers scattered like terrified birds. Remus tracked them with unnatural, predatory precision. The cannon roared again and again, a rhythmic, deafening drumbeat of defiance. He swatted the airborne wizards out of the sky with brutal efficiency, the explosive flak vaporizing their shields and shredding their brooms. The Armada realized the threat and shifted their focus. 5 gunships pivoted, locking their primary batteries directly onto Remus's position. "Come on," Remus roared, his eyes glowing a blinding gold in the darkness, rain washing the blood from his face. "I am the last marauder. Come on." He held the trigger down, laying down a continuous stream of suppressive fire, filling the sky with a wall of explosive silver magic, buying Harry the precious minutes he desperately needed. On the helipad, the storm was a secondary concern to the nightmare unfolding in Harry's hands. The arithmantic core was in full meltdown. The violet radiation had intensified, forming a swirling, localized singularity that pulled at the rain, the iron, and the very concept of gravity. Harry knelt in the center of the massive blood-ruined circle he had painted onto the rusted steel. His left arm hung uselessly in its sling. His right hand, still gripping the bleeding crystal, was completely devoid of skin, the flesh burned away by the raw friction of reality. The bones of his fingers were black, fused to the arithmantic crystal. He slammed his ruined hand into the center of the circle. "Bind," Harry rasped. The blood runes ignited with a searing, emerald light. The ritual didn't destroy the radiation. Energy of this magnitude could not simply vanish. It had to go somewhere. The circle was designed to act as a funnel, drawing the reality-erasing magic out of the crystal and channeling it down into the iron pillars of the oil rig, grounding it harmlessly into the Earth's crust deep beneath the ocean floor. But the arithmantic bomb was too volatile. It refused to go into the iron. It violently rejected the grounding path, rebounding up the only magical conduit available. Harry. The violet radiation surged up Harry's right arm. The pain was not physical. It was ontological. Harry felt his memories, his emotions, his very concept of self being violently attacked. The arithmantic energy was trying to erase him from the timeline. He screamed, a silent, agonizing void of sound that tore at his vocal cords. He had to contain it. He had to absorb it, or it would detonate and take the entire hemisphere with it. Harry threw his head back, his green eyes widening as the violet light bled into his irises, corrupting the emerald. He tapped into the deepest, darkest well of his kinetic magic. He didn't push the energy out, he pulled it in. He created a localized, internal kinetic singularity, a black hole inside his own soul, designed to swallow the arithmantic radiation and trap it within his own body. The runic scars on his arms burned black. The dark magic flooded his nervous system. It felt like swallowing liquid nitrogen, mixed with shattered glass. He felt the last, lingering warmth of his humanity, his ability to feel joy, sorrow, or comfort, being violently anesthetized. The radiation was freezing his soul.
Contain. Bind.
Execute. The mantra echoed in his fracturing mind. He held his hand fast against the steel, refusing to let go, acting as the living, breathing containment vessel for a weapon of mass destruction. He was becoming the very darkness he was sworn to destroy. He was paralyzed, locked in a metaphysical war for survival. He couldn't move. He couldn't fight. He was entirely exposed on the open helipad. And then, through the haze of agony, he heard the unmistakable, deafening clack-clack of combat boots hitting the metal grating behind him. While Remus kept the heavy gunships occupied, the elite remnants of Vance's Praetorian Guard had managed to halo jump from the stratosphere, bypassing the anti-air flak. 20 men, clad in advanced tactical armor and armed with magically modified assault rifles, landed silently on the upper decks. Their objective was singular: secure the helipad, kill the boy, and reclaim the core. They moved up the final stairwell in perfect tactical formation, breaching the helipad's blast doors. They expected a firefight. They expected to face the kinetic demon that had slaughtered their men in the deep. Instead, they found a lone woman. Lily Potter stood at the top of the stairs, blocking the entrance to the helipad. She looked like a corpse that had refused to lie down. Her red hair was matted with blood and rain. Her skin was a translucent, ghastly pale, the veins beneath her neck black and dead where the ignis anima had finally burned out. She could barely stand, leaning heavily against the rusting guardrail. But her eyes were open, and they were cold. She held her kinetic assault rifle in her right hand, resting the barrel on the rail. She had no magic left, no shields, no healing charms. She was operating purely on the terrifying, primal instinct of a mother protecting her cub. The lead soldier raised his rifle. Target acquired. Execute. Lily didn't flinch. She squeezed the trigger. She didn't fire wildly. Her military training took over, precise and lethal. Her first 3-round burst took the lead soldier directly through the visor of his helmet. He dropped instantly. Before the squad could react to the ambush, Lily dropped to a crouch, sliding across the slick metal grating to a new piece of cover behind a heavy iron winch. She fired again, aiming low, shattering the kneecaps of 2 more advancing soldiers, sending them tumbling back down the steep, rain-slicked stairs. Suppressive fire. Pin her down, the squad commander roared. The stairwell erupted in a blinding storm of curses and kinetic rounds. The iron winch Lily hid behind was rapidly chewed to pieces by the heavy fire. Shrapnel bit into her shoulder and cheek, but she didn't make a sound. She was a phantom, disconnected from her own physical pain. She pulled a concussive flashbang from her tactical vest. She pulled the pin with her teeth, cooked it for 2 seconds, and banked it off the bulkhead down the stairs. The explosion was deafening, a blinding flash of white light that disoriented the tightly packed squad. Lily broke cover. She didn't retreat. She advanced. She vaulted over the ruined winch, dropping directly into the center of the blinded squad. The rifle was too long for this range. She dropped it, drawing a standard military combat knife from her boot. She moved with the brutal, mechanical efficiency of a slaughterhouse worker. She slipped a thrust from a blinded soldier, driving her knife up under his chin, bypassing the heavy body armor. She pivoted, using his falling body as a human shield to block a desperate stunner cast by another guard. She ripped the knife free and threw it, burying it to the hilt in the throat of the squad commander. A soldier tackled her from the side. They crashed hard onto the rusted grating, the impact forcing the air from Lily's collapsed lungs. The soldier straddled her, drawing a heavy combat pistol, aiming it directly at her face. Lily didn't panic. With a terrifying calmness, she reached up, jamming her thumb directly into the soldier's eye socket with maximum force, while simultaneously bringing her knee up to shatter his groin. The man screamed, dropping the pistol. Lily caught the weapon out of the air, shoved the barrel directly into the gap of his chest armor, and pulled the trigger twice. She shoved his heavy body off her and forced herself to stand. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Her vision was failing, the edges of the world turning black. Her breathing was a wet, horrific rattle. There were 5 soldiers left. They had recovered from the flashbang. They stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at the blood-soaked, dying woman in absolute horror. She was entirely mortal, devoid of magic, half-dead, and yet she had dismantled their elite unit in 90 seconds. "Get past her!" one of them yelled, raising his wand. Lily stood her ground in the center of the doorway. She had no weapons left. Her body was broken, but she didn't move an inch. She squared her shoulders, looking down at them with an expression of absolute, unyielding defiance. "You will not touch him," Lily whispered, her voice barely carrying over the storm. The soldiers raised their weapons to fire. Suddenly, the air pressure on the helipad violently inverted. A shockwave of pure, freezing kinetic energy rolled over the stairwell, hitting the soldiers with the force of a hurricane. The men were instantly frozen solid, encased in absolute zero ice, their bodies shattering into dust before they even hit the ground. Lily slowly turned around. The arithmantic light was gone. The core was completely destroyed. The ritual was finished. Harry stood in the center of the helipad. The storm around them seemed to hesitate, the rain violently repelled by the terrifying aura radiating from his body. The runes on his arms were gone, replaced by veins of pure, pitch-black energy that pulsed beneath his skin. He had absorbed the bomb. His eyes were no longer emerald. They were flat, depthless pools of black glass. There was no rage left in him. No sorrow. No love. The radiation had burned away the last remnants of Harry Potter. What remained was the pure, unadulterated essence of the Obsidian Protocol. The perfect, emotionless executioner. He looked at his mother. Lily took one step toward him, a look of profound heartbreak crossing her bloodied face as she saw what her son had become. She reached her hand out toward him. "Harry," she breathed. And then her legs gave out. The adrenaline faded. The catastrophic damage to her body caught up with her all at once. She collapsed forward onto the rusted steel. Harry moved instantly, catching her before she hit the ground. He knelt, holding her against his chest. His face remained an impassive mask of stone, but his body shielded hers from the rain. Remus crested the stairs a moment later, his shotgun smoking, his breathing ragged. The anti-air battery had run dry, but the sky was clear. The remaining gunships had retreated upon sensing the catastrophic spike of dark magic from the helipad. They knew they had lost. Remus dropped his weapon and ran to them, sliding to his knees. He looked at Lily's pale, motionless face, then looked up into the terrifying, dead eyes of the boy he had helped raise. "Is it done?" Remus asked, his voice breaking. "It is done," Harry replied. His voice didn't echo. It sounded like the silence of a grave. "The timeline is secure." "And Lily?" Remus choked out, pressing two trembling fingers to her neck. "She is alive," Harry stated, a clinical observation devoid of relief. "Barely. Her internal organs are failing. The curse is gone, but the damage is absolute. She requires immediate, sustained stasis." Remus carefully gathered Lily into his arms, lifting her against his chest. The great wolf looked exhausted, broken by the sheer weight of the war they continued to wage in the shadows. "Let's go home, Harry," Remus whispered. Harry stood up, the black veins pulsing under his skin. He looked out over the endless, violent ocean. The power vacuum had been temporarily sealed. The world of magic and muggles would wake up tomorrow entirely unaware that their existence had been mere seconds from deletion. "There is no home," Harry said softly, turning his back on the sea. "There is only the next target." The safe house was located in a forgotten, subterranean bunker deep beneath the Scottish Highlands, miles away from the ruins of Hogwarts, miles away from the Ministry, and miles away from the light of the sun. It was silent. In the center of the primary medical bay stood a massive, cylindrical tank of magically enriched amniotic fluid. Suspended inside, hooked to a complex array of alchemical life support systems and deep sleep enchantments, was Lily Potter. She looked peaceful, floating in the luminescent blue liquid. The terrible wounds had been healed, but the fundamental damage to her life force meant she could not survive outside the stasis field. She was trapped in an indefinite sleep, a living monument to the sacrifices made to keep the world spinning. Remus sat in a heavy leather chair beside the tank. He was reading a muggle book, his reading glasses perched on his scarred nose. The feral edge was gone, replaced by a profound, heavy sorrow. He was the guardian now, the watcher of the sleeping queen. He had traded the battlefield for a quiet vigil, knowing that out there, in the dark, the war continued. Down the hall, in the cold, unadorned armory, Harry stood alone. The room was filled with racks of kinetic weaponry, runic explosives, and encrypted ledgers detailing the movements of the remaining magical syndicates across the globe. Harry was out of his tactical gear, wearing simple, dark clothing. He stood in front of a steel mirror, staring at his reflection. The black veins had receded deep into his flesh, invisible unless he channeled his magic. But his eyes remained the same flat, dead black. He raised his right hand, the hand that had crushed reality. It was whole, healed by the dark radiation he had absorbed, but it felt incredibly cold. He couldn't feel the temperature of the room. He couldn't feel the metal of the table beneath his fingers. He pressed his hand against his own chest, directly over his heart. He could feel the rhythmic, mechanical thud of the muscle-pumping blood. But he felt nothing else. The grief over his mother's condition, the sorrow of Terry Boot's betrayal, the lingering warmth of his memories with Sirius and Ron and Hermione, they were gone, locked away behind an impenetrable wall of frost. He was perfectly calm. He was perfectly efficient. The arithmantic bomb hadn't destroyed him, it had perfected him. It had stripped away the one vulnerability that every executioner suffered from, a conscience. He walked over to the central tactical table. The Berlin Manifest lay open, its pages filled with red ink, crossing out the threats they had already neutralized. But there were still dozens of names left. The Russian covens, the South American blood cartels, the rogue unspeakables in the Department of Mysteries. The world was entirely ignorant of the abyss that constantly threatened to swallow it. They celebrated their peace. They built their monuments to the heroes of the Second Wizarding War. They believed the darkness had died with Voldemort. Harry picked up a black tactical marker. He drew a sharp, precise line through the name of the Yakuza Syndicate and General Vance's Splinter Cell. He looked at the next name on the list. A flesh-crafting cartel operating out of the catacombs of Paris. Harry didn't sigh. He didn't hesitate. He simply turned away from the table and walked toward the armory racks to prepare his gear. There would be no medals for the Obsidian Protocol. There would be no songs sung about the sacrifices made in the Bermuda Trench or the blood spilled in Neo-Tokyo. They would remain monsters in the eyes of the law, ghosts in the eyes of the public, and nightmares in the hearts of the wicked. The executioner strapped a runic blade to his thigh, his black eyes staring blankly at the cold stone wall. The world was safe, and it would remain safe. No matter how many souls Harry Potter had to break, including his own. The world is safe, but at the cost of Harry's soul. What did you think of this darker, tactical era for the Potters? I want to hear your thoughts. And I need you to make a choice for the next mission. Drop Paris in the comments if Harry should hunt down the flesh-crafting cartel next, or type Lily if his absolute priority should be finding a dark cure to wake his mother. Your votes in the comments will decide their fate. See you in the next video.